Mountain Housing Council is a project of the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation, whose mission is to connect people and opportunities, generating resources to build a more caring, creative, and effective community. Many of you know us for our grant making and scholarship work. Our mission-based initiative work, in addition to the Mountain Housing Council, includes Forest Future and Family Strengthening through the Community Collaborative. We are led by a very visionary board of directors. I'm just going to scan quick here to see if any of them have joined us. And if you'd like to say hi, I welcome you too. Sorry, I'm not scanning very quick. With a quick scan, I don't think I see them. Again, we have a very talented team at the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation. I'm joined today by my colleague Caroline Crafty and Sashay Cantu. If any other colleagues are on, please say hi. So the Mountain Housing Council is comprised of 29 different diverse stakeholders, businesses, local governments, community groups, special districts, and housing advocates. We take on the unique and pressing challenges of achievable local housing in the North Lake Tahoe region. And this is the region right here. Our goal is to build on the needs identified in the Truckee North Tahoe Regional Workforce Housing Needs Assessment and the Regional Housing Implementation Plan to tackle these unique needs, which include availability, variety, and affordability. Housing struggles for wildland firefighters and U.S. Forest Service employees and forest workers are not unique. We have housing struggles for all employees in our region, but today we want to focus on this specific need and discuss any opportunities or solutions that we can come up with together. And so as we approach wildfire season, many of those who work hard to prevent and contain wildfires in our region face serious struggles with finding affordable housing, and this seriously impacts our region. Our ability to protect our forest and community from wildfires depends upon large numbers of permanent, temporary, and seasonal workers, many of whom struggle to find affordable housing. So to give us more information about this need and to talk about what they're doing, we're going to be joined today by three speakers. Jedra, who is the Acting Forest Supervisor of the Tahoe National Forest, Laura Metune, who's the Senior Director of Government Relations and Grant Development for Lake Tahoe Community College, and Carlie Murphy, who is the Forestry Education Grant Manager for Lake Tahoe Community College. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to give the floor to Matt.
All right, perfect. Thanks, everyone. And yeah, this is a great topic. I think there's not a day that goes by that we don't have conversations about housing here on the Tahoe National Forest. So back up a little bit. Again, I'm Matt Jedra, Acting Forest Supervisor here on the Tahoe National Forest. Our office located in Nevada City, but we've got a district office there in Truckee. We've got another one up in Sierraville, another office over in Camptonville, and we got an office in Forest Hill for the American River Ranger District. So I got a little presentation here that I'm just going to talk about some key bullet points that we struggle with housing. So folks know, the past couple of years have been pretty tough for us here in the National Forest System just because of housing availability. So this is an availability piece for our temporary staff, our permanent staff, all around California, all around the region. So we have a hard time recruiting, as I think a lot of folks do, whether you're in National Forest System, you're in the private sector, we just have a hard time overall. The biggest piece there, affordable housing locally, some of our rents that we've seen around the Truckee community, around Forest Hill, upwards of $2,000 a month for rent. And when entry-level firefighters coming in, at that GS, 4, 5, and 6 level, that's really tough. They can't afford that. So here locally on the forest, we've got government housing that is available, roughly about 60, 65 beds, and those are taken up. We do like a first come, first serve. A lot of the times we focus on our wildland firefighters, our suppression resources, our recreation techs have a priority in some of those as well, because we manage all of our own resources here, our own campgrounds in the Tahoe. So it's Forest Service folks out there managing our resources. So a lot of those do go to our suppression folks because of the urgency of protecting life and property, protecting our homes and communities is key for us. So one thing that we have kind of talked here locally about housing is that, majority of the housing that we used to have that was available was taken up now by Airbnbs. And folks, you guys are all well aware of that. The rental market has, you don't find long-term rentals or short-term rentals. Most of that has all gone through the, to the Airbnb process now. So we struggle finding homes and places for our temporary employees. And I also don't want to leave out the piece that as we try to recruit and fill a number of positions on the Tahoe, we look at our permanent staff as well. The permanent staff struggle just as much as trying to find affordable housing. And more times than not, folks turn down jobs to come and work in the National Forest System because they can't find affordable housing anywhere on the Tahoe. So right now, we have some authorities that are granted to the agency. 2018, the Farm Bill was authorized, which allows us to use special leasing authorities for the agency. This authority expires, I believe it's October of 23. So we're in the process of working locally with some folks on the Truckee Ranger District under the Joint Powers Authority. And I can get, pretty deep into that, but, it's a powers authority that's in and around the community of Truckee. It has Nevada County, the town of Truckee, major organizations such as, the hospital and the airport. So under this, this Joint Powers Authority, we're trying to look at a process where the Forest Service has administrative sites. We've got the Truckee District Office right there, almost in downtown Truckee. We've also have the Hobart Work Center, which is just north. So we're trying to look at an opportunity where we can partner under the Joint Powers Authority, where we have administrative sites, administrative land, to be able to offer for folks under the Joint Powers Authority to build high density single family home residential housing at an affordable price for our employees, but also opening up to the community. Census Authority has come out in 2018. There's been one forest, I believe, in the region or in the agency, the White River in Colorado, who is actually moving forward in this process. It's a pretty tough process for us to go through just because of the nuances with it, but also legalities that we have to go through to allow a site to be an administrative site, but also to have developments built on that site. So we're pursuing that, hoping it's going to come to fruition. We've got a good team locally here on the Tahoe that's helping out, plus some of our regional office folks. But that's exciting for us. That's just another option that we have. And I know, as I mentioned, the two sites that we had right near our Truckee office, but we've also got another one near the Hobart Work Center, and that one doesn't have the utilities that we have. So water, sewer, electricity, etc. So we all know the cost of that, how expensive it is to be able to run that stuff for housing. So we're still working through that process. Another thing I kind of want to mention is, last year we had the ability to utilize some local administrative sites with Palisades Tahoe, and we entered into under a special use permit to authorize them to utilize our campgrounds in the off season under a special use authorization to be able to have their folks live there on our federal ground. It was a little bit of mixed results. I think overall we met the intent, but off-season camping can be tough, can be cold. You guys know that. So we're trying to look at some other options here. But I will say, I think the greatest impact that we have, with our fire staff locally, we've got 11 engines on the forest, fire engines. We've got 3 hot shot crews. Each one of those hot shot crews consists of about 20 people individually. Most of those folks are in that entry level range from, that GS 3, 4, and 5. So it's an entry level position. And last year we ended up using one of our administrative sites to allow some of our employees to camp there as their residents because we couldn't find local housing, which is pretty tough. That's really tough for us. So now as we move forward, we're looking at other opportunities to build government facilities locally. We're trying to look at long-term rentals to try and lease those in the community that we can get for a lower price if we know that we're going to commit to a long-term. So yeah, that's going to be a big piece of what we're going to look at coming up in the year 2023. And it will add a bit about this. So with our fire staff and with our permanent staff, normally we are fully staffed this year on the Tahoe. covering just over 1 million acres. We've got all of our 11 engines are staffed, but the staffing, instead of it being a 7-day, effective, we're 5-day now, because we couldn't fill a lot of our positions to be able to staff the engine for a 7-day period. So it does affect us a little bit. We're augmenting our timing. We're augmenting our our staffing levels to make sure we've got coverage across the forest, which is continuous, which is what we do. But the big piece of that is that these folks don't have a place to live, and then when they go to apply for a job, they don't have any housing. So what do we do? So another thing I want to touch base on, as we look at this Joint Powers Authority, we're trying to look at additional partners in the Truckee, the Tahoe region, which, our forest, the Tahoe National Forest, extends from New Bullards Bar, Grass Valley, Auburn area, the front country, straight over the top of the Sierra Crest, over almost to Nevada. To the north boundary is almost to Highway 70 in Plumas County, north of Downeyville, and then the southern half, we're almost coming up to the rim of Lake Tahoe. Granite Cheek Wilderness is kind of the southern part of our boundary, so pretty big area, 1 million acres to cover. So we're trying to find these other areas and other opportunities that we can partner with folks to say, do we have affordable housing here? What can we do to bring our staff on board a little bit sooner, have some of that commitment with these folks, go from a, early spring to end of fall kind of commitment with partners, with local folks that own homes, that have additional Airbnbs that they really want to, help us out to try and get some of the housing covered. So, the last thing we want to do is have folks camping in the parking lot at our offices, but, people are making do. Some folks living in Reno, driving up into the Truckee office. They're living out into Auburn, Sacramento area to drive up to some of our offices. An hour and a half commute is not uncommon for a lot of our staff. But yeah, I think the big struggle there is how do we partner together? How do we look at opportunities in and around the community? We look at grant opportunities, et cetera, with our partners to be able to, whether it's building new facilities under Farm Bill, under Joint Powers Authority, how do we start gaining some traction on this? And I want to say this is not just an issue here on the Tahoe. This is an issue region-wide, in California. Probably almost agency-wide, I should say, living out west. Everybody knows the cost of homes has gone up pretty significant. So I'm going to leave it there. I know there's a bunch of other information we're going to talk about. We're going to get into some good questions here, but I just want to leave it there. Pretty high-level approach. I appreciate the time today. This has been fantastic to have the folks here to talk about the issues that we have with housing in and around the Tahoe, especially around Truckee. We try to do our best as public servants, to manage the land, to be the stewards of the land, but trying to find affordable homes, as you guys all know, is a real big struggle for us, and we're trying to look at all different options here, especially working with our partners to try and come to some good results. So I appreciate it. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Matthew. And, thank you so much for what you're doing to keep our community safe. And as you said, this is a struggle that we're all trying hard to work towards solving. And so I know there will be some questions. I have some questions. So if people do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll address them after our next two speakers. And it would be my pleasure to welcome Carlie. Is that right, Laura? Carlie's going to go first. Okay. So yep. Carlie, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for the introduction. It was great to hear your presentation too, Matt. So hi, everyone. I'm Carlie Murphy. I'm the Forestry Education Grant Manager at Lake Tahoe Community College, where we are creating a new forestry program that is set to launch this fall. I did want to clarify that Lake Tahoe Community College is located in South Lake Tahoe, but we do often have students coming from all over and throughout the area. But our presentation will be mostly focused on South Lake area, but as Matt just described, these problems really are facing us throughout the whole region. So I think it's applicable to the district of the Mountain Housing Council as well. But our forestry program, which is comprised of stackable certificates that will lead to an associate degree, was created in a direct response from our local, regional, and our state partners who are desperately in need of forestry workforce. And so Lake Tahoe Community College has had a very successful fire academy for many years. And when we heard that there was this gap in forestry workforce, they were eager to take on this somewhat similar, but also new program to help meet those needs. And so to meet this call, we received funding from the California Tahoe Conservancy as well as CAL FIRE. to create the program that will train students to fill skilled forestry positions throughout both our Tahoe area and also just beyond the state of California and the Western US as a whole. So before diving into how things are looking in our community and for students, I think everybody on this call likely knows that how important trained forestry professionals are to meeting this growing catastrophic wildfire crisis. So these forestry students will become the next forestry workforce while they're in school doing work experience, but then also after they graduate. And in both of those times of their careers, they are going to need a place to live while they are attending the school, and then of course, once they enter a career. So I believe that's why we were invited here today. And a note on the college, we really aim to recruit diverse students to our programs, and many of them are low income and can't afford our, Tahoe's high cost of living. And so I often, just to provide an example for how housing is looking for students, I'm often referring interested students in our forestry program to work with the California Conservation Corps due to their outstanding programs and their on-site housing. Really, like, when students are coming to me asking about housing and they're interested in our forestry program, that is almost the only option I can provide them with. You'll hear about an initiative we're working on here in a bit from my colleague, but right now it's that's kind of my answer. And unfortunately, that option is fantastic for some, but it does not work for everyone based on maximum age requirements within the Conservation Corps, and also for students who are older or have families, aren't interested in living in more of a dormitory type setting. So I wanted to point out that not only do our students need this housing, many of our entry-level forestry professionals are struggling, as Matt described in his presentation. So people who are coming from an entry-level position and looking to promote to that next level is really hard in those years when you're entry level. I know this personally. I struggled for many years before reaching that level, and it's really important that we think about those lower forestry professionals earning a lower wage currently. And I really, to tell this story well, I wanted to share a conversation that I had with a prospective student recently. So I was contacted by this person who lives outside of the area and was really eager to attend our forestry program. And they mentioned they were just they had the passion. They were so excited about forestry, right? This is the ideal person we need working in forestry. And as I dove into some of the specifics around applying to the college and our cost of attendance, they were really curious about housing, as everyone is right now. And so I shared some of these options that could be available to them. And during this conversation, they were visibly saddened by my response. And I don't know if it was the housing conversation or if it was some other part of our conversation specifically, but I did not hear from them again after that point. And it really is these stories that are so painful to our college, because we know that it hurts us to know that students maybe aren't going to college because of these housing issues. And personally, it really hurts me knowing that this is a person who is so passionate about forestry, and maybe they don't go into forestry now because of this one housing barrier, Their tuition is likely covered. Every other cost is covered. It's just housing that remains kind of this missing link. And I think what's really important to point out is that many forestry education and training programs throughout our state are located in rural forested areas where housing is a problem. And so if we're trying to solve our workforce crisis by educating individuals and getting that skilled for forestry workforce ready to go, they need a place to live, and we're not going to meet those demands unless we figure out where they're going to live while they're in training, and then of course once they're employed. Before I pass it off to my colleague to talk about some of our successes recently, I wanted to leave on a high note and point out that we have recently received donations from the Tahoe Fund and a grant from the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation to help us reduce the cost of attendance for students in our forestry program and in our fire academy. So these students their tuition costs are going to be significantly reduced. They can use the money on rent if they need it, but we all know that clearly a one-time scholarship is not enough to offset some of their housing costs. So, we're really working hard to make sure that our students can afford to live here. And so I'm going to pass this over to my colleague, Laura Metune, who's going to share some of the solutions we're working on. Laura?
Thanks, Carlie. So as Carlie described, we at the college have known for a long time that the lack of affordable housing and stable housing for students negatively affects their ability to enroll, progress, and then succeed in college. Actually, Lake Tahoe Community College has been working on student housing for almost a decade now. In 2013, we launched a Vision for the Future process where we identified goals for the institution, and student residential living was identified as a key goal. In 2014, we added student housing to our facilities master plan. In 2016, the college conducted a student demand analysis to understand what students were experiencing in the housing market off campus and what level of interest they had in having housing on campus. Of the nearly 400 students that responded, 66% indicated that they were struggling to find housing off campus. 75% said that renting in the off-campus market was negatively impacting their academic pursuits. They also often reported that the housing that was available to them was in poor condition. They struggled quite often with dealing with their landlords. And then 42% of our part-time students said that they could actually switch to be full-time if they had access to on-campus affordable housing. And so those results led our board to approve issuing a request for interest to determine if there were any private developers that wanted to partner with the institution in a public-private partnership to develop housing on campus. Essentially, no developers responded to that request. And the feedback that the college did get was that the project was a pretty small scale because we're a relatively small community college, and that the cost of building in the Tahoe Basin is simply too high to be able to offer rents in an affordable way, that the money just didn't work for a public-private partnership. So as an alternative, in 2019, the college entered into a 5-year master lease with an area apartment owner. Essentially, under that master lease, we work directly with students. 31 students have access to off-campus housing at a rate of $675 a month. It's a great start, but it just falls short of what our students' needs are. And so in recent years, the legislature and the governor's office began to recognize this interplay between student success and having access to affordable and stable housing. And then the 21-22 Budget Act, they approved $2 billion to construct student housing at UC, CSU, and the California community colleges. And in fact, they reserved half of that money, $1 billion, for community colleges. Colleges were invited to apply for funds in October of last year, and we were allowed to apply for grants to cover the full construction costs of the project. But in return, essentially, we needed to agree that housing would be for full-time students, that low-income students would be prioritized for access, and that the units would meet set rental maximums. So essentially, we can't charge more than 30% of 50% of area median income. One component of the application required us to really make the case for why housing was in demand for our students. And for all of the reasons everyone's already stated, we were able to pretty successfully make that case. And I do want to call out the Tahoe Prosperity Center and the Tahoe Chamber, who have issued so many reports on this issue of housing affordability in our area. We were able to cite these reports, the evidence of the tourism economy, meaning that most of our housing was used as second homes or short-term rentals. We were able to cite the evidence of 35% housing price increases during the pandemic, vacancy rates that are regularly below 2%. And then, what we're seeing is that this lack of housing is contributing to more working age adults moving off the hill, right? As Matt mentioned, moving into Reno, into Sacramento, into Carson. And not only does that probably affect, personal happiness when you're spending an hour and a half commuting, but it also contributes to the traffic congestion that we're facing in the basin, to our carbon footprints. And so we decided that we would go ahead and submit an application for this housing funding. Our hope was that we would secure resources that could immediately support our students, but also alleviate some of the housing crisis affecting the larger basin. So we submitted our application in October. We requested $39.9 million to construct a 100-bed facility. And just to give you a sense of how that process went, the legislature made available $500 million in year one. They got 42 construction applications that totaled 2.8 billion for that 500 million. And so the Department of Finance went through those applications and made determinations on who would be eligible for this first year funding. They recommended 8 projects, and our project wasn't initially included on their list of projects for funding this year, mostly because they looked at 2 factors. They looked at what your rental amount would be, how much below that maximum you were. We actually ranked pretty well on that factor. But the second factor was, how much does it cost to construct per bed? And I think you all know the reality of building in Tahoe is always going to be more expensive than Roseville or Fresno, which are some of the colleges that got funded in that initial or recommended in that initial application. So after the Department of Finance list was released, we went to work lobbying the legislature, who ultimately had final authority over which projects were approved. And I know there are a number of organizations represented on this call who supported us in that effort. Ultimately, we were successful. In June, the legislature essentially approved all of the projects that were deemed eligible. Ours was among those, and provided an additional $1.5 billion in year 1 to fund everybody. So what that means, with the governor's signature on the Budget Act just 3 weeks ago, we are going to receive $39.4 million to support the construction of the project. Now that we have that allocation approved, we can begin working fully to achieve the goals of the project. Essentially, our plan calls for 32,000 square foot facility that includes 100 beds. 90 of those beds will be configured as double occupancy units, and 10 are going to be single occupancy units. Students are going to have access to a shared kitchen, but in addition, in each room, they'll have a small area with a refrigerator, microwave, and sink. The rental amounts are set at $500 a bed for the double occupancy rooms and $795 per bed for the single occupancy rooms. We reserve those single occupancy rooms with the desire to serve students who might be older students, who might be veterans, who might have, personal issues that really prevent them from thriving in that traditional dorm environment. In order to be eligible, students need to be enrolled in a minimum of 12 units per quarter, although there are some allowances if students face a personal emergency that means they have to drop below that. And in addition, they need to meet low income requirements. The low income requirements are essentially related to who qualifies for financial aid. It's a fairly complex formula that looks at how much your education costs and what your income and earnings and assets are. But if you can use these different metrics to determine low income, and it often means that most students qualify as low income. And we're currently in the process of working with TRPA and the City of South Lake Tahoe to ensure that the construction approvals are granted as quickly as possible. Our target is to begin construction next summer, and then we would plan to have students moving in no later than fall of 2025. And I want to recognize that this is obviously not a solution for the forestry workforce housing, but it is a solution to helping us get more students into this workforce pipeline. It provides them affordable housing while they're completing their educational program. And their educational program can include credit-based work experience. So it could be that students are working in the field while they're living in the facility, as long as they're obtaining credit for that time. And in addition, obviously, we believe that by putting students on campus, we'll free up some of the limited affordable rental housing that currently exists in the area. We really do believe this is a game changer for our students and one part of the solution for broader community efforts to provide housing. Again, I want to thank all of the organizations that supported our effort, and a special shout out to our board member, Jeff Cowan, who's on this call, for all the work that's been done before I joined the college. So I'm happy to answer any questions about the project. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. Congratulations. That's a big deal to get that financing. So we need to continue with the lobbying efforts and to push through and make such a difference in the community with 100 beds. So congratulations, that's fantastic. So right now I would like to invite people, if you do have questions, you can use the feature, the raise your hand feature that is on Zoom, or you can put your question in the chat. And while people are doing that, I just want to call out John's comments in the chat. And so John Radebold wrote, "We have 2 apartment units in Kings Beach. We prefer year-round renters, but can rent to fire season workers too." So Matthew, I want to make sure that you saw that. And John did leave his phone number for you to contact him offline. And so I think that is also an interesting segue. At the beginning of this call, Laura, Carlie, and Matthew and I were talking about different incentive programs that are available in the region that help unlock some of the housing that's here for our workforce. And one of those programs is called Lease to Locals. It's administered by landing locals. They currently are operating and administrating the program in the town of Truckee. It's been over a year. And basically they give grants, it just changed, anywhere from 0 to 6 months and then 0 to 12-month leases. It's 2 tiered. And if you're a homeowner and you have short-term rented or you've never rented before, they will give you a grant to do that, to rent a room or rent your whole home to a local employee. So those are great programs to keep in mind. They do have criteria, so you do have to qualify. But if you do qualify, please look it up. It's about to be enacted in Placer County, East Placer County. I know Western Placer County too, I think, is exploring it, but it will soon be in East Placer County, and then South Lake, Tahoe is also exploring it. So I believe my colleague is, yes, she just put it in the chat. Thank you, Caroline. So that's a good resource for people. And so I'll stop talking. Are there any questions? Does anybody have a question? Please feel free to raise your hand or put your question in the chat box. Sarah, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Sarah Hurd and I work with the Nature Conservancy, and I also live in Truckee. And so I hear you, and I can sort of feel your pain, although I'm not a forestry worker, and I really appreciate all the work that all of you are doing. I have 2 questions. I'm curious. The first one is really for Matt. Has there been any sort of housing needs assessment, or do you have a sense of the magnitude of the problem? Like how many of your workers need housing, whether in California, or you mentioned even agency-wide? And then I guess a question for everybody, and it's a really general one, but what would help? Like, are there certain policy changes at the state and national level that would particularly help, or the local level, or like what is your biggest, is there something that could change? Or if you could change 1 or 2 things, what would it be?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So to get into the first part of your question, I don't know if there's been anything formally that's come out about a housing needs assessment. I know whenever we hire folks, whether they're temporary or permanent, we've got a list of, here's the websites that we go to. Here's some Craigslist. Here's some Airbnbs that can do some long-term rentals. Here's some housing in and around, Auburn, Grass Valley, Nevada City. The same up in Forest Hill. So here's like the standard places that we go to find housing. But every one of our employees, first thing to do is say, what's the housing like? And we always talk about that when we do our job announcements. It's like, hey, please do your homework when you apply for this job. If you're applying for a job in Truckee, your median home price is probably well over $1 million now. So folks are looking at where can they afford, where can they live, whether it's in Truckee or whether it's in Reno. So we really haven't done an official needs assessment that I'm aware of, but every employee comes on board, that's their main reason, and a lot of times we will, they'll do their homework, they'll understand that, yes, it's expensive. They'll do some local research and then come back after we make them a job offer and say, you know what, I can't accept the offer because I can't afford to go there, and then we look at, we have incentive programs to be able to bring people on for relocation, help with their moving expenses, stuff like that. But, that doesn't get at the long-term issue, and there's a lot that's been going on in the past with our increase in firefighter pay. So that has gone through, that was part of an act through Congress. So our firefighters did receive that benefit this year, and there's more to come about changing job series for firefighters to get them into a higher pay capacity. So yeah, that is the biggest piece, but get back to your question, I don't know of an official needs assessment that's been officially done. To the second part of it, just real quick, we struggle with our ability in the agency, with pay caps, pay, et cetera, that is our government salary, the GS salary piece of it. But I don't know if there's things that we can do from a partner organization. That's why we're looking at, the Joint Powers Authority, the Farm Bill Authority that we have to be able to construct facilities on administrative sites where we can basically find a landlord, so to speak, to manage a housing unit on federal land. So that is one of the tools that we're looking at right now. But that was, it took a long time to get through. We have that authority now, but it's we're slowly working through the process. And in Truckee, there was some concern about the airport and buildings and where they're located. So we're trying to work a little bit around that. But down in Mammoth on the Inyo, they're looking at the same process. The White River National Forest in Colorado is working at the same process. So I just think echoing that concern from all different partners and all different aspects to say, we've got a real issue with housing for our forestry workers. And how do we kind of wrap our heads around that? How do we look at different housing options for this? And our constituents are well aware of this as well. Great question.
In terms of what can happen or what we can do, I wanted to just raise a couple of examples from how this project came to be successful. One is voters in South Lake Tahoe approved a local bond measure that allowed us to do some of that groundwork in terms of the student demand survey, our facilities master planning, that groundwork that ultimately meant our application was deemed eligible at the state level. And then, as I said, we looked at the feasibility of building this in a public-private partnership, and it simply wasn't financially workable. We would not have been able to do this without grant funds available. So similarly, encouraging the state to invest in grant fund projects that help public agencies build affordable housing.
Great, thank you. And I just want to piggyback on that. The Mountain Housing Council, with partnership with one of our partners here, Business Council, really leads our advocacy arm. And we're very involved with other coalitions and groups around the state. Just what you're saying, like trying to, that's our goal for next year, is really trying to get the legislator to realize that there needs to be more funding for affordable housing, but also for our missing middle. You were lucky to qualify for those grants, but there's stipulation with them that people have to earn 30 to 60% of AMI. And that's true with all grant funding, really, is for that AMI bracket. And so, one of our goals at Mountain Housing Council is to help our legislators see that there is this need for that missing middle. And in our regional, you asked about a regional housing needs assessment. So the Mountain Housing Council in 2021 did conduct an updated housing needs assessment, and we found that we need about 9,500 units. That's our unmet need, people who are inadequately housed. And in that, people who are inadequately housed earn up to 245% of AMI, and that's how unaffordable it is right now in the region, and that's what's exacerbating these workforce housing issues. So I agree about the lobbying, and I would encourage everybody to attend their jurisdictional meetings. In our region, Nevada County, Placer County, and the town of Truckee all have their Board of Supervisors or town council meetings on Tuesdays, the second and the fourth Tuesday of the month. So we hope to see some of you there. And thank you, Sarah, for your question. I'm just going to quickly look at the chat box. So yes, thanks for bringing up the pallet shelter. So in addition to our advocacy efforts, the Mountain Housing Council is exploring different tools that we can use here in the region, and we have, with our supportive housing and homelessness working group, explored the pallet shelter idea. We currently have a tiger team, which means it's just a group of people coming together on a project that we hope has an end in the short term, to explore a pilot where people could potentially live out of their cars, as Matt had said earlier, that some of his workers were doing at the administrative buildings. And so it's definitely something that we're looking into. And I guess, so I want to make sure that I'm not taking all the time with my questions. But I guess, Matt, I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more on the program that you did have, if it was just informal because of the need to house your employees, or if you had some formal structures around people living out of their cars.
No, it's nothing formal. I mean, we don't have a lot of people living out of their cars. It was kind of when they were looking for places originally, it's like they would bring their campers or RVs, and put them in the parking lot until we could find some place. We want to make sure that they're not living on admin sites, that they have a place that they can rest every night. So, that was a short-term concern, but we have since found them other locations. We've looked at some of our admin sites on the forest, our group campgrounds, et cetera, and had folks stay in those, like we did that last year, just because of housing concerns with COVID. But yeah, as far as nothing has been formalized about that, about that process. So.
I was just going to say, Christina, just so folks, and I apologize if I missed this, but just so folks know, Mountain Housing Council is also getting more involved in terms of advocacy at the state level and in lobbying to make sure that our legislators are aware of kind of the specific challenges at our region, in addition to looking into partnering on ballot measures and bond measures with other groups in California who might share some of our similar interests and concerns. So always kind of getting more involved with us and talking more about very specific issues when it comes to anything that we need to do legislatively or on the ballot is also kind of on the table.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Emma, I see your hand up. Please ask your question.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I am actually an intern for Blue Forest Conservation, and I'm spending my summer kind of investigating the need for seasonal workforce housing, specifically for Blue Forest partners in the North Yuba Forest Partnership. So Matt, I was really interested on your commentary on potentially building higher density housing in administrative sites and tapping into joint powers authority. So I was wondering if you could expand on that opportunity, but also challenges that might come with it, and just generally how you're thinking about that and what entities are involved in the joint powers authority.
Yeah, great question, Emma. So for us, the joint powers authority that we have in place right now is so we've got the Nevada County, I believe, and then we also have the town of Truckee. And what that joint powers authority does is has those major organizations, like I think the hospital is part of that as well, for Truckee Health Hospital. And that authority allows us to, when we use the Farm Bill Authority, we have to have this JPA established as an organization that is looking at like needs, it's looking at the assessment, it's looking at the costs associated with it. It's these large organizations that are in the county that have a vested interest that are looking at doing building homes and high density housing on public land. And the biggest piece around this is that when you look at administrative sites, that's the only location that we can go to build facilities on Forest Service land. We can't just take a block of land, and give this to somebody and say, hey, go ahead and build this for us. There's probably some other avenues that we need to go through to get to that piece, but our administrative sites are the ones that we can deem necessary to use or to put high density housing on. So right now we're trying to look at other locations because the one in Truckee, the ranger station is located in a flight path of the airport. So it's kind of deemed unworkable at the moment. So now we're looking at, well, is there another administrative site, or what does it take from the agency, the Forest Service, to make a site administrative? And generally that would have to go through a NEPA process where folks have the ability to comment on that. It's our National Environmental Policy Act, and conduct an environmental analysis that, public has the ability to weigh in on it. So there's a lot in the background there, but the JPA is one tool that we have, an organization that people can get together, can coalesce around, have a common goal, and understand how we can utilize the Farm Bill Authority. But I will say, that Farm Bill Authority is pretty complex. There's nobody that has gone through, successfully implemented it to date. The White River National Forest in Colorado is probably the furthest along, and I know they were having some conversations with the chief's office last week or the week before to kind of, give this out a little bit, get a little more information behind it. But I mean, you and I should, connect offline and figure out how to partner on some of this, So for folks that don't know, Blue Forest Conservation is a huge partner with us on the North Yuba Landscape Resilient Project, which is a 313,000 acre watershed where we're planning about 275,000 acres of treatment. And it's one of the national priority landscapes in the agency. So Blue Forest, I see some folks from National Forest Foundation are on this call. We've got some other folks that are involved in this. The South Yuba River Citizens League with Circle, Nature Conservancy. We've got a bunch of other folks, Yuba Water. So we've got a lot of folks that are involved in this. But yeah, trying to find that location that is most suitable for it, administrative site, and then seeing what other authorities we have out there. I mean, there's opportunities out there, especially in the federal government. We just got to kind of wrap our heads around them and see what we can do. But great question, Emma.
That was a great question. So I'm sorry, I think I got a little lost in that. So is the JPA that you're a part of is not the Truckee Tahoe Workforce Housing Agency JPA? It's a separate that you just named all these organizations who are a part of it.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you. For those of you who live in our North Lake Tahoe region, we do have a joint powers authority that is between our school district, our hospital, our utility district, and our airport. And just recently, Nevada County, Placer County, and the town of Truckee joined. And so I just wanted to clarify that it's two different things that Matt is talking about. And then I also just want to clarify a comment that Laura put in the chat, and it was about my comments about AMI as far as like tax credits go for housing developments. And so when I said 30 to 50% AMI, that's not the qualification for these students for the housing. It's instead how much they can charge for rent. So students just have to qualify for financial aid. It doesn't have to be within those AMI brackets like the traditional affordable housing is. And Laura, did I get that correct still, or am I still?
Yeah, no, that's still, the flexibility on the definition of low income allows us to dig a little bit further up in terms of the income bracket, but your point about the missing middle is still completely valid and absolutely something, you know, we face when these grant programs are so narrowly constructed.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Or just, you know, Matt just named some of the agencies that are on the call. If you want to expound on anything that has been discussed, or even, you know, I think to the very first question, and forgive me if I think it was Emma who asked it, you know, what as a community can we do? And I'd love to hear what some other people think. Or you don't have to answer that question. If anybody else has another question, please feel free to ask. And Kathleen, I see that your box is yellow, but I'm not sure if you were trying to ask a question or not.
No, I'm not. Just
Okay.
moving around here, trying to get things straight. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I just want to make sure. Simone, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I won't take up too much time. Thank you, Christina. Hi, everyone. My name is Simone Cordery-Cotter. I am a former Truckee resident, and I have since relocated to Portland, Oregon, where I work in the fire service. And I interact a lot with rural communities in Eastern Oregon, especially working out of Hood River, Oregon today. That has a lot of the similar challenges that North Lake Tahoe has. With affordable housing and workforce housing. Just wanted to, I was curious to know from the folks that are out of South Lake Tahoe, whether or not I believe it was an ordinance passed a couple of years ago banning short-term rentals within a certain region within town. If you have seen any measurable needle movement from that, or if that has not been as successful and met the metrics that folks were hoping that would do.
I can chime in on this first, and then Laura, I'm sure you have some to share, but I have no data to share on this, but I know Landing Locals is really trying to work with those homeowners, and they've already started working with them to identify these short-term rentals that could become long-term. I know personally, myself, family, friends who live here, often our neighborhoods are now kind of empty. People they're just vacant homes instead of long-term rentals, which is kind of what the intent was. And instead, I think we ended up with a lot of open, empty units in our community. However, I'm really excited about the work that Landing Locals is doing, and I'm hopeful that they can continue to do more and more outreach to these homes that are sitting, for the most part vacant most of the year, to start housing people. I know their incentives, I was just looking on their website actually, and their incentives are pretty reasonable. So I think it's just making the connection and continuing the outreach in that space. But short answer to your question, I personally have not seen that Measure T helped this housing problem that we're in all that much. Laura, did you have anything to add?
I was just going to add that I think one of the challenges was that at the same time that change was taking place, we also went into a pandemic. And so you saw a lot of influx of remote workers, which I'm sure is true on the North Shore as well, but folks who, why would you you know, live in, I won't name any place, but, you know, in certain places, if you could live in Tahoe and work remotely. And so what happened in my neighborhood is that the short-term rentals, you know, did turn into long-term rentals, but they didn't necessarily alleviate housing crisis for people that lived here already. It was largely Bay Area folks that ended up, or, you know, folks from different parts of the state that ended up taking those over. And then I also saw large increases in sales of homes in the neighborhood because the market increased, right? And so if you weren't able to rent your home on a short-term basis, a lot more people ended up selling their home at prices that, you know, working families wouldn't be able to afford. But I do think that maybe had an impact on the how successful Measure T was not that it, you know, may have had a different outcome had we not faced some of those other factors in that process.
Thank you. I know we don't have a ban like South Lake Tahoe does, but Placer County and the town of Truckee also just recently put caps on their short-term rentals. And anecdotally, we don't have the evidence, but Landing Locals has said that they have seen more people reach out to do long-term rentals. So hopefully that will be a trend. So we are nearing the end of this event. We have 5 more minutes. We have time for one more question. Emma, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, so I actually have one more question for Matt. So relating to Laura's comment on a public-private partnership not being that effective because, you know, it's small scale and the cost of building in the Tahoe Basin was too high. Do you think similar issues would pertain to some kind of public-private partnership in the Tahoe National Forest area where, you know, perhaps it's even more remote? And are there any kind of logistical concerns with regard to like transport of materials, you know, beyond just the lack of maybe profitability, but do you foresee those kind of issues also being present in a public-private partnership on the Tahoe National Forest area?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we do. So right now, when we're looking at contracting and putting our things out, the bids that we're coming back on, a lot of the stuff that's going to happen on federal land, whether it's, you know, service work or, you know, we're in the process of looking at building a new campus for the supervisor's office in Nevada City. Our costs are just coming back, you know, 30, 40, 50% over what our estimates are just because of local building materials, supply and demand, housing market. Biggest thing is inflation. So yeah, I would foresee those same opportunities, so same challenges that we see here that are in the South Lake that you would have on the Tahoe. I think that may kind of spiral down a little bit as this, you know, housing market, interest rates are up, you know, so we're going to kind of see a little bit of shift in this bubble, and maybe some of that will come down from inflation. But yeah, those concerns are alive and well with us, trying to figure out how to get around them.
Thank you, Matt. So this is a good segue into our upcoming event. So tomorrow, the Mountain Housing Council has its quarterly meeting. The meetings are for partners, but the public can attend. And one of the things that we'll be talking about actually is the need for a regional hub, which would be basically an entity that could help make projects like you were just discussing, Emma and Matt, come to fruition in a short amount of time. And this entity would also help with some of that financing that we have seen that is missing and is needed to make these projects pencil. So if you're interested in any of these housing solutions and want to discuss more, we invite you to attend tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. You can register at our website, mountainhousingcouncil.org. And with that, I'd really like to just extend a heartfelt thank you to Carlie, Laura, and Matt for speaking and your time tonight, but also just for what you're doing. Matt, you so eloquently said, and Laura and Carlie, the negative aspects of not being able to house our wildland firefighters and our forestry workers. And so I just applaud your efforts for housing from the pipeline all the way up and keeping our community safe. And so thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to everyone else for joining us tonight. We appreciate you participating with us. So we hope to see you tomorrow. And if not, please check back at our website for future events like tonight. So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.